Hello, I'm Simon Whistler. You're watching Today I Found Out, and in the video today, why are teachers associated with apples? Just before we get started with today's video, let me say that if you like this sort of edutainment content, you might also like a podcast called The Complete Guide to Everything. This isn't a paid sponsorship or anything like that. These guys are just friends of the show and they make really good stuff, so I wanted to let you know about them. Please check a link out in the description below for more, and let's get into today's video. Widespread, publicly funded mandatory education has only been around since about the 19th century. Before then, the responsibility of providing schooling to children fell primarily on their families. Upper and middle class families tended to hire tutors or send their children to a private school run by a schoolmaster. That didn't mean the children in lower class families missed out on learning how to read and write, though. They often learned this at home through apprenticeships or church-funded schools. In addition, some poor families scraped together enough money to pay for their children to receive an education. Some even worked out a barter arrangement with teachers where they were paid with surplus produce from the family's farm. For instance, poor students from farming families in Denmark and Sweden often brought baskets of potatoes or apples to school as payment, among other staples, the potato being used for food and the apple generally being used for making drinks at the time. In the United States, things changed when various social reforms came about in the 1800s. The reforms addressed issues ranging from food sanitation, treatment of the mentally ill, and even education. Schools became publicly funded and subject to regulations in order to ensure that all students were more or less getting the same educational opportunity. By 1913, a majority of states in the USA required that schools be paid for by the government. However, towns on the sparsely settled western frontier still often bore the responsibility for paying a teacher in the town. As before, they recruited teachers and they provided a schoolhouse where classes could be held, a place for the teachers to live, fuel for heating, and often food. This included such things as gathering on Saturdays to give it a thorough cleaning. That tradition of bringing food to teachers continued even as the United States government took over the responsibility for funding public education. The baskets of food were eventually replaced with smaller amounts as the old boarding round room and board pay system was replaced by a cash salary. But why do school children traditionally give apples to their teachers? As mentioned, there are records of students from such places as Denmark and Sweden bringing both apples and potatoes to their teachers, among other things. So why don't students traditionally give potatoes to teachers? Well, there are two generally accepted answers. For the first hypothesis, teachers were often seen as a moral influence into the lives of children. Indeed, the boarding round system often ensured that teachers toed the line with the community's moral standards. Teach something outside of this, and suddenly you might see your food or heating fuel payment just disappear. Along with this, the tree of knowledge in the story of Adam and Eve in the book of Genesis has often been mistakenly referred to as an apple tree. This is partially thanks to Aquila Ponticus, who was a 2nd century translator translating the Old Testament from Hebrew to Greek. He took the liberty of referring to the tree of knowledge as an apple tree, even though the original text doesn't say that. It's likely that he chose to do this because he was translating it to Greek. In Greek mythology, apples were seen as symbols of desire and destruction. Due to the prevalence of this tree of knowledge apple tree idea, it wouldn't be an out-of-place gift then for students to give their teachers an apple, the fruit representing knowledge. So, on to the second popular hypothesis for the continuance of giving apples. Apples arrived in North America shortly after the Jamestown colony was founded in the early 1600s. These apples, unlike the ones found in supermarkets today, tasted bitter, but they could be used to make hard apple cider. Many people, whether rightly or wrongly, considered hard cider a safer beverage than water because widespread sanitation of drinking water did not yet exist. Apple trees also flourished in a variety of climates, contributing to the popularity of the fruit. The sweeping social reforms that allowed schools and education to become regulated also posed a major problem for apples. The temperance movement that spanned from the mid-19th century to the early 20th century sought to eliminate the drinking of alcohol in the United States. Apple growers scrambled to rebrand the fruit in order to remove themselves from the controversy. Careful cultivation caused the fruit to lose its bitter taste and to become sweeter and sweeter with each new generation of apples. Marketing campaigns also played a part in the apple's new image. Phrases like "an apple a day keeps the doctor away" were dusted off and used to brand the apple as a healthy snack. So the hypothesis here goes that students and their parents who wanted to get on a teacher's good side saw apples as a way to give the teacher a healthy, cheap snack, which was also quite versatile, able to be used for both drink as well as a sweet treat. Thus, the hypothesis goes that they chose to keep giving this food item rather than something like the potato because it was more versatile. And now for a bonus fact. The term apple polish was coined in the early 1900s and means that a student is trying to get favors from their teacher, essentially a brown-noser or a suck-up. So I really hope you enjoyed that video, and just before you go, let me tell you about something else that you might enjoy. If you enjoyed this sort of edutainment content, then you'll also enjoy the podcast, The Complete Guide to Everything. It's a podcast that I've listened to for a very long time, and it was a big inspiration behind my own podcast, which is called Brain Food. This isn't a paid sponsorship or anything like that. It's just the two guys who run the show, Tim and Tom, are friends of this show, and they're making great stuff. So please do check them out through the link in the description below. And as always, thanks for watching.